Getting to the heart of the matter. Back to Guy, Ben, and Frank with more Inside the News.
Welcome back to Inside the News. Glad to have you with us as you're watching us on YouTube and AUN TV and across the nation on our affiliates and SoundCloud. Okay, our election trail segment here, Frank Vernuccio there is on your top left. Frank, let's talk a little bit about Marxism. And, last time I heard about, all this communist business was back in the 60s. And then it tried to come back a little bit in the late part of the 1900s. But now with Bernie Sanders and AOC, there's a huge move afloat to get this. And I believe they are the underpinnings of what's going on in the Biden campaign. What are your thoughts on that, Frank?
Well, certainly the Democratic Party as a whole is running in terror from domination by Marxists within the party. The reason, for example, that Nancy Pelosi felt that she had to put on the impeachment charade, despite the fact that she knew it was going to go nowhere, was the influence of people like AOC and the Squad. Look, we have now had 2 generations of Americans that have been educated from kindergarten through PhD level by essentially Marxist sympathetic professors. The country is in a far different condition than it was in any other time where Marxism reared its ugly head in the United States. The major moguls of the media in Hollywood, who influence culture as much as politics, we now see the influence of Chinese money in Hollywood. So whether we're talking about the influence of education, the influence of the popular culture from Hollywood, we are seeing a new strength to the Marxist movement in the United States. It has almost wholly dominated the Democratic Party at this point. Joe Biden is being portrayed as a centrist, as a moderate. In reality, when you look at the positions he's taken, they're no less extreme than what AOC or Bernie Sanders had advocated.
You know something, Ben, and we are all old enough to understand this. Eisenhower coming out of World War II, and, then there was the space race. They had Sputnik, and we got the Mercury program up. And then Kennedy says, I want to go to the moon. It was the race against the Russians to get our space race going. We had the Cuban affair. Those 13 days there. And so the nation really was galvanized that the Russians were the bad guys here and that socialism is the bad thing. And then we have the Weather Underground, and that brings in Obama and some of his trainings in the 60s and what was going on there. And everything that Obama learned, he brought into his administration from 2008 to 16. And now it has really blossomed huge. What do you think about all that, Ben?
Well, unfortunately, as time goes on, the level of ignorance in this country increases. And we have an entire generation that has little or no exposure to the evils of Marxism as they existed in the 20th century, where it was in your face, you could feel it, you could touch it. And it was a very real juxtaposition of Marxism on the one hand versus freedom and capitalism on the other. And I say freedom and capitalism quite intentionally because they go together. They are correlated. They're flip sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without the other. If you enjoy freedom, you must have capitalism because capitalism is freedom to vote economically. And if you are unfree to vote economically, you are not free. Socialism is the absence of capitalism, which is essentially Marxism. So socialism is a code word. Unfortunately, I don't know I really want to use that phrase, but socialism is being used by a lot of political activists. There are some who really know what they're doing, like Bernie Sanders, who's really a committed Marxist, even though he's gotten wealthy through capitalism. But he wants that to apply to himself. He wants socialism and Marxism to apply to everyone else, which makes him a true Marxist. The reality is that these Marxist ideologies are in play among a lot of people like the Squad, just as Frank said. And there's one country where you can see the results of that pathway. It's called Venezuela. And I urge anyone who has doubts to study Venezuela.
All right. And Frank, I saw you nodding your head there when we were talking about capitalism, and you could probably expound upon that a little bit more, but we've got to move on. Ghislaine Maxwell, and she has been arrested. And I think the real thing is to keep her alive. She's afraid for her life because she doesn't want to be, there was a little cartoon by Ben Garrison out there, and it was like Wheel of Fortune, but it's called the Wheel of Death. And, had different ways that people die, whether it's around the Clintons or whatever, it was suicide or whatever. This is a real deal here that people, when they start getting around, and Epstein was the guy, and I do not believe for a minute he committed suicide. And Frank, you're up there. It looks like they're repeating the same mistakes again, Frank.
Yeah, more and more, it seems that the concept that President Trump brought into his campaign in 2016 about the swamp in Washington, D.C. is becoming more and more obvious to everyone. There is a undercurrent of, I guess you would call it corruption in general, where certain people can commit whatever crimes they want and get away with it. The Clintons, of course, took money from the Chinese in their campaign, or the Chinese attempted to funnel money to the Clinton campaign. In return, the Clintons gave the Cray supercomputer to China. President Clinton, in the waning months of his campaign, gave China an open door into the American economy, which wrecked American manufacturing. All of these things came about with no type of repercussions, not even in terms of bad publicity, for heaven's sake. And yet we see these intertwinings of people like the Clintons with the Epsteins and so forth, with nothing ever happening to them. That is why what's happening to Maxwell is so important. She has threatened to pull the plug on a lot of politicians in Washington. I think once you look at the dirty undercurrents of what's going on and the immunity of American politicians, particularly those on the left of the Democratic Party, to any kind of prosecution, then you're seeing how important all of these investigations are and how important they all tie themselves together.
Frank, just that little talk that you just gave, just that little, explanation there, kind of leads into something that was talked about the three of us before we started our show today, and that was what's going on with the Durham report. And Ben, you had some thoughts on this, and some you can share on air, and some you cannot share on air. But it seems like, where's the report? What in the world is going on? The election's in a few months. People of America want to know, and this is not good news, I don't think.
No, we're hearing open rumors that the report is going to be delayed to the other side of the election. And I have a great fear that means that this may all be buried once again. Bill Barr has a lot of faith in Durham as in his ability to pursue the facts without political influence. I'm not as convinced because when I hear about delaying this till after November, that is purely politically driven. So that decision alone belays that confidence. So there needs to be a special prosecutor named. It's the biggest scandal in American history. The administration of Obama spied on the Trump campaign and continued and invented an entire hoax around Russia and interference to cover up that spying. So it has to be uncovered, and those responsible have to be brought to justice.
Wow, we could spend another 10 minutes talking about this. I believe it's absolutely fascinating. You're watching us on AUN TV and listening to us on affiliates across the country. This is Inside the News. We're going to take a time out. We will be back.
You're listening to Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.